What if I told you W.A.S.P wasn't a band, it was a war zone with a tour schedule? The music was blood-soaked brilliance, but the real show was backstage. Rigged contracts, shattered trust, and two egos locked in a death grip. Here's how the whole thing blew up, twice.
Like, subscribe, thank you.
The Sunset Strip in the early 80s was a proving ground soaked in cheap booze and louder-than-hell guitar solos. Right in the thick of it came W.A.S.P, fronted by Blackie Lawless, a man who looked like he crawled out of a horror movie and brought the soundtrack with him. W.A.S.P detonated pretty quick. From day one, it was controversy and high-voltage ambition, spitting fire, flinging raw meat, and tearing through the LA metal circuit like a wrecking ball in fishnets. Between 1982 and 1990, they made enemies, headlines, and metal history. Before the world met Blackie Lawless, there was Stephen Duran, a journeyman in the gutter glam underworld of the late 70s Los Angeles, chasing the dream through every smoky dive and failed lineup he could claw into. One of those lineups was Sister, a flash of chaos that burned fast and filthy, with Lawless on vocals, Randy Piper on guitar, and a pre-famed Nikki Sixx on bass. Sister was proto-W.A.S.P, caked in makeup, soaked in menace, and hungry for shock. By 1979, Lawless and Piper regrouped in Circus Circus, a tighter but no less unhinged experiment. We know a hotel or two that would have been crying copyright on that name. But nevertheless, these bands built a blueprint. The riffs, the blood, the showmanship. When W.A.S.P launched, it was the result of years spent sharpening the knife. W.A.S.P exploded out of the LA gutter in '82, stitched together by trial and error and the sheer force of Blackie Lawless's will. And the first lineup looked solid on paper. Lawless snarling at the mic and slinging rhythm guitar, Randy Piper bringing the shred, Rick Fox on the bass, and Tony Richards on the drum. But it was chaos from the jump. Fox was almost out as fast as he was in, briefly replaced by Don Costa, who didn't stick either. Piper bailed, then came back. Somewhere in that mess, Lawless ditched the guitar and strapped on the bass, locking himself into the frontman role with a death grip. That same year, Chris Holmes entered the picture. 6 foot something, wild-eyed, and barely house-trained. Lawless took one look and made the call, "I need you in the band. It wouldn't work unless Chris was in it." And Holmes hadn't even seen a W.A.S.P gig yet, but it didn't matter. He wasn't just another guitar player. He was a threat, and that's exactly what they wanted. So by the time W.A.S.P hit the studio to cut their debut in 1984, the chaos had congealed into something lethal. The lineup was locked. Blackie Lawless had fully stepped into his role as the band's ringleader, bass in hand, teeth baring, voice dripping venom, codpiece on the crotch. Randy Piper and Chris Holmes flanked him with a two-guitar assault that sounded like chainsaws dueling in the thunderstorm. Piper with that flash and Holmes with that brute force. And Tony Richards kept it all glued together from behind the kit, hammering out beats like a caveman with a death wish. And this was a war machine assembling itself in real time. So when their self-titled debut dropped, it declared war. Chris Holmes looked back at the first W.A.S.P record like a gang initiation, loud, messy, bound by blood. To him, it was a unit, all for one, which he said verbatim, which might have been a slip, or maybe just the way it felt. No room for outsiders, no room for compromise. But Holmes was certain that the band's signature bite came straight from his guitar. He said, "I knew a lot about frequencies and EQ, and W.A.S.P sound came from my playing." Whether or not the whole thing hung on his tone, you cannot argue with the results. The debut album was a Molotov cocktail. Tracks like I Wanna Be Somebody, Love Machine, they didn't just rock, they bled. And then, of course, there's Animal Fuck Like a Beast, the song Too Raw for Capitol Records. It was yanked from the U.S. release like a ticking bomb, but across the Atlantic, Music for Nations let it detonate. Meanwhile, W.A.S.P turned shows into blood-spattered carnivals, Lawless wielding a mic stand made from a motorcycle handlebar and a skull, hurling raw meat into the crowd, strapping women into some of those really funky, crazy racks under strobe lights. Pure spectacle, pure provocation, and it pissed off exactly the people they wanted to piss off. The pmrc came running in with the pitchforks, and W.A.S.P, well, they just turned up the volume. And the honeymoon phase did not last. Barely had their debut hit the shelves in '84 before the lineup was starting to crack. Drummer Tony Richards was out, swapped for Steve Riley, who'd later find a second life in LA Guns. Officially, no one gave a clear reason. Unofficially, Chris Holmes didn't hold back. It was a big mistake, he said. They could have dealt with his drug problem, but they never even tried. They just chucked him out. But for Holmes, that was the first red flag. Kind of quiet betrayal that starts a bit as a whisper and then just turns into this pattern. The W.A.S.P was still on the rise, soaking in the spotlight, but inside the machine, the cracks were already starting to show. So W.A.S.P's second album, The Last Command, dropped in '85, and it hit like a hammer. The rough edges were sanded down, the production much glossier, but the hooks were sharper. Wild Child, Blind in Texas, blasted through radio and MTV, pushing the band from cult spectacle to mainstream menace. Chris Holmes said it best: their career took off, but behind the scenes, those gears were grinding. According to Holmes, the band that once lived and breathed like a unit was now orbiting a single sun, Blackie Lawless. The transformation was absolute. Holmes watched what used to be a brotherhood turned into this branding campaign, and Blackie was the brand. One look at the Last Command cover confirmed it. No band shot, no unity, just Blackie front and center. Holmes claimed that Lawless told him the manager wanted it that way, but Holmes didn't buy it. He saw a man who idolized singular icons like Muhammad Ali and wanted to be one. To Holmes, this was about ego, the kind that doesn't share a spotlight. The shift from band to brand cut straight to the bank account. According to Holmes, what looked like a unified front on stage was a rigged game behind the scene. From day one, Holmes, Randy Piper, and Tony Richards and Blackie were all under the same management deal, but only Blackie Lawless was actually signed to the label. That changed everything. And Holmes claimed that he was boxed out of every real business decision. Publishing rights meetings happened without him. Royalties were carved up in silence. When the contract surfaced, Holmes says he wasn't listed as a co-writer or even a bandmate, just a session player. The hired gun on every record. And that's the difference between living off of your music and watching somebody else cash in on your riffs. Holmes says he didn't uncover how deep the cut went until decades later, around 2006. And by then, the damage was done. To him, it was about trust. And whatever was left of it had been shredded. But Blackie Lawless wasn't having any of it. He brushed off Holmes' accusations like old dirt. According to him, Holmes had already been paid twice. Legal settlements, signed documents, money in the bank. And Lawless insisted that he was paid quite well. The idea that Holmes got stiffed? Not true. In Lawless's eyes, the real problem wasn't business, it was booze. Chris's spiraling alcoholism, publicly acknowledged and increasingly visible as the band climbed higher, was what drove the wedge between them, personally and professionally. But while the cracks widened behind the scenes, the W.A.S.P machine kept rolling. In '86, they dropped Inside the Electric Circuits. It sold, charted, and kept the momentum going. But something felt off. The polish was still there, the shock was still present, but the edge was dulled. Lawless, now juggling lead vocals, rhythm guitar live, and bass duties in the studio, was restless. Randy Piper exited stage left. In came Johnny Rod on bass, pushing Lawless further toward the center of everything. The music kept coming, but the band was turning into a solo act with backup players. By 1989, W.A.S.P had shed its skin. The Headless Children wasn't just another shock rock album. It was an all-out metamorphosis. No more blood-spattered stunts, sex-drenched anthems. In their place, political rot, addiction, existential dread. Songs like The Heretic, The Lost Child, and Mean Man, a blistering tribute to Chris Holmes, cut deeper than anything they'd done before. Even their cover of The Who's The Real Me sounded like a warning shot. They had a sharper, heavier, but a more cinematic sound going on. And Lawless made sure the execution matched the ambition, bringing in Frankie Banali from Quiet Riot to hammer the drums with surgical precision. But for Blackie, this was more than growth, it was an actual purge. He decided the original crew could not keep up, musically or creatively, and Holmes, in his view, was becoming baggage. The writing was already on the wall. In 1990, right after marrying Lita Ford, Chris Holmes walked, or was really pushed. Either way, he was gone. According to Holmes, it wasn't just him. Johnny Rod and Frankie were out as well. But the lineup crumbled. W.A.S.P was not a band at this point. It was Blackie Lawless with a rotating cast of players, and a new chapter written in his handwriting only. So between 1982 and 90, W.A.S.P went from throwing raw meat in seedy LA clubs to headlining stages around the world, and they did it by lighting every fuse they could find. Blackie Lawless, the architect, and Chris Holmes, the wrecking ball. So now with the lineup gutted, that era became messy and volatile, and Blackie Lawless did not pause. He didn't regroup, he just cut the cord and kept on moving. So with Chris Holmes out and the classic lineup unraveled, Lawless came back with the Crimson Idol. Released in '92, it wasn't just a new album, it was a whole new way of doing things. A concept record built from the ground up as a solo project, it showcased exactly what Lawless had been chasing all along. Full creative control, zero compromise. No band votes, input, just hired guns and the story only he could tell. And it turned out to be pretty ambitious and theatrical, meticulously crafted. Everything he believed a traditional band setup would sabotage. And that pivot said everything. But even Lawless, knee-deep in introspection and narrative arcs, felt the pull of something more raw, something louder and dangerous. And in August 1995, Chris Holmes was back. Lawless said it wasn't about nostalgia or money. He said he had enough of that. What he was missing was that chaos, confrontation, that primal, unpredictable electricity W.A.S.P used to summon when Holmes was on stage and nobody knew what was going to happen next. He wanted that fear in the hearts of governments and religious leaders, and he believed nobody but Holmes could drag that darkness out. Meanwhile, Holmes was hoping the second time around might be different, a bit more clean and fair, less control freak, more collaboration. But within months, he knew the script had not changed. Said, I thought it could be different, but I quickly learned that it would not be. Still, they pushed forward, locked in a cold war of mutual dependency. Their twisted reunion bore fruit in 1997's Kill Fuck Die, a snarling industrial nightmare that ditched sleaze for straight-up psychological horror, recorded in secrecy, almost like they're even hiding it from themselves. They're going for that Marilyn Manson crowd. Mechanized drums, digital sludge, lyrics like open wounds. No more trying to be vintage. W.A.S.P was trying to survive in a genre they helped create but no longer recognized. And it sounded like that. Angry and confused, out for blood. But it didn't take long for history to repeat. Behind the grim theatrics of Kill Fuck Die, the same rot was spreading. Money, control, and this growing resentment that never went away. Holmes claimed he was promised half the publishing rights, and instead he got nothing. In his words, he got screwed again. And the betrayal cut deep enough that he fired back the only way he knew, through songs like Two-Faced, Motherfucker, and The Truth. Open wounds disguised as solo tracks, each aimed at Lawless himself. And Holmes hated the album, called it a piece of crap, or actually he said it sounds like shit. To him it wasn't dark or bold, it was desperate. And to him it was kind of obvious that Lawless was chasing Marilyn Manson's shadow, scared the crown of shock rock was slipping. And the industrial direction, digitized aggression just didn't sound like W.A.S.P. It didn't sound like Holmes. And worse, he was just feeling purely out of place. As a person, as a player, Holmes said that Lawless was despising his playing, the solos and rhythm. When he rejoined in 95, Lawless didn't sugarcoat it. Said, you need to start playing guitar differently, reinvent yourself. And Holmes didn't flinch. He's like, I'm happy with who I am. I'm not changing for you or anybody else. And it turned out to be a full-blown clash of philosophies. Holmes was really into the improv. You know, he liked the spontaneity and the instinct of it. He wanted to tear solos open on stage and really just reinvent them every night. Meanwhile, Lawless wanted that predictability. He wanted him to play note for note. What started as creative tension turned into artistic suffocation. They could make the noise, but they certainly could not make the peace. The Holmes' second run with W.A.S.P. ended not with a fight, but a vanishing act. No formal goodbye, just silence. One day he checked the listings and saw W.A.S.P. was playing shows without him. No call or notice, just erased. Holmes was in exile. And what followed was years of scorched earth interviews and bitter counterattacks. And Holmes didn't mince words. Lawless, he said, was a narcissist, so obsessed with control and image that it strangled the band's potential. They could have been Metallica, Holmes claimed, if Lawless hadn't turned W.A.S.P. into this one-man dictatorship. The sticking point was the money, the publishing, the credits. Holmes says he never got a dime for the songs he helped build, and he never knew he was being legally framed as a session player until it was much too late. Lawless, of course, said that was just all bullshit, and when asked about a reunion, he shut it down cold. He said it was like a divorce. You don't go back. To him, the original lineup isn't sacred, it's outdated. But the thing is, to Lawless, bringing back the old crew would have been regression. And to Holmes, it's unfinished business. And to everybody else, it's a lingering shadow of a band that never stopped being at war with itself, even when the amps were off. And when Mean Man, the story of Chris Holmes, dropped in 2020, it was loud, lopsided, Holmes' version of the truth front and center. Blackie Lawless did not take the bait, said he couldn't recall being invited to participate, but even if he had been, he wouldn't have touched it. He said, not based on truth, just another one-sided story in his view, built to prop up a narrative that needed him as the villain. Lawless went further, saying that Holmes stays relevant by shit-talking Blackie, throwing out claims with no proof and relying on old grudges instead of new ideas. And then came 2022. Chris Holmes went public with a cancer diagnosis, and the rock world rallied, old bandmates and peers and friends. Lawless didn't reach out personally, but W.A.S.P's official account did issue a statement wishing him well and hoping for a full recovery. It was polite, distant, pure PR, no call or reconciliation, just a sterile message from a band built on blood, war paint, and betrayal. And even facing mortality, the divide between them stayed intact. But Chris is back in action, playing W.A.S.P songs on his own terms. No theatrics or skull mic stand, just the riffs that he helped forge, delivered with that same brute force tone that once shook the strip. He doesn't claim to outdo W.A.S.P or upstage Blackie Lawless. He just wants his piece of the legacy he helped build. And Holmes doesn't even flinch when W.A.S.P trots out the first album in full. He's not mad anymore, at least not in public. He says the audience isn't just showing up for Blackie. They're there for the logo, the brand, the memory. If there's ever going to be a reunion, he's clear. Cut the check. Pay what's owed. Until then, it's a non-starter. The story of W.A.S.P's early years is a study in combustion. From 82 to 90, the band embodied everything that made metal dangerous. Raw talent, impossible egos, and just enough unity to create something timeless before it exploded. The music still roars, but so do the grudges. And as long as both men keep telling their version, W.A.S.P will remain what it always was. Not just a band, but one of our favorite battlegrounds of all time. To my subscribers, you frigging rock. Thank you so much. And if you haven't had a chance to subscribe, do battle with that subscribe button and win. Reach over, pop that like button in the face, join the family. I want to thank you so much for watching.